between developer-driven costs and ad valorem, just so that should there be another downturn, it won't be quite as, the impact won't be as great as it is this time around.
Okay. Regarding the next page, where it says excise tax, Midwest Commerce net, there's a huge jump from 2011, 2012, and then the actual 2012, which, I mean, I don't know why would there be a big jump this year when I would thought it would have been.
When the budget went through, this accounts for several development projects, plus the excise tax that we can collect from the school district project. So basically, some projects that were came to be before after the budget was set up.
Behind capital projects.
So they're already in the works.
They're in the works, right?
So this 488 is. So how much does the school district?
Well, we're working on that. This is an estimate.
But is there anything else that's a major component, or is that most of it?
The church.
There's a church, there's Quick Trip.
That's made up of some pretty specific projects. That's our estimate.
Okay.
Those are the biggest.
And then where it says, let's see, when it says things like moving projects to B&I fund on the line under expenditures.
Yes. Remember when I said that the bond and interest fund had to raise the mills to cover part of the excise tax shortfall? That's the answer to your question.
So it's really,
it means
it's
that
not the project, it's moving money.
We're covering the pay. So the list and expenditures that you see on that page, so the total for 2013 is $674,000. That basically, that $674,000 is all of those projects less the numbers in parentheses, which means we're paying that portion of it from somewhere else. That's what we've had to do since it started, the downturn and the excise tax fell off. So those negative, in other words, think negative expenditure.
Okay.
And we're covering it somewhere else.
And then the next page, under the Special Highway Fund, there's a lot of blank spaces, like under lane mile sealed. Does that mean there was no...
That's correct.
There's nothing there?
That's correct. They're blank because they're blank.
Okay. Well, some of them say NA, so I didn't know.
Yeah.
Some say zero, so...
Yeah, right.
Figured.
Yeah, saving ink.
2 pages away from that, under the funds exchange program.
Yes.
Is the purpose of the funds, I mean, when we did that, it was explained that the exchange allowed us not to have to use the state's, captive contractor. But is there also a secondary benefit of using the money for different projects? In other words, it's a 90%, right?
Correct. Following the normal procedure, there is KDOT can come up with a number that we would be allocated. If you follow the old method, you get in line, you try and get a project in, then KDOT controls that project. You basically follow their bid process. Under this, there's a distribution to the cities based on population. They come up with the amount of money that what they get from the Federal Highway Administration would be allotted to us based on that distribution. So, as you mentioned, it's 90 cents on the dollar. What we have to do is, as long as it's transportation related, we can request reimbursement. The only rule on a project is that we follow the federal right-of-way acquisition. Otherwise, we follow our own procedures. We set up the project. We follow just generally, except as long as it's legitimate engineering principles, as long as we follow our own standards, it works for them. So,
but can we use that money for other? In other words, can some of that money go to the street overlay? Well, I know.
It could.
It doesn't have to be for a specific project.
Well, you have to, when you make the request, you have to earmark specific projects for them to disperse, and then you make requests based on that project. You can't just say, I spent X amount of dollars on an overlay in the city. It has to be, I spent money on an overlay on this project.
But do we get more leeway in spending money that is not necessarily, charged to us? In other words, is there any ability for the city to say, well, for instance, I think the last time we did it was on this Main Street.
Right, and that's the only project we're doing it on right now.
Right, and if we saved money and they gave us the 90% trade-in, would we be able to use the money for other upkeep projects, or does it have to go specifically to that project? And if we save money, we just save money.
It would, if we save money, it would have to go to that project. However, you generally request a little less than what you think you're going to spend, so you don't leave any on the table.
Okay. Next page. It says in the program description, capital improvement reserve accounts for capital improvement projects or studies that were financed from the transfer general fund, park improvement fund, or other sources of revenue. I guess since none of these other funds seem to be very active, what are the normal sources of revenue?
Airport grants, airport pass-through, FAA grants for the airport projects. Typically, what we're referring to there is grant funding. And there's been in the past, the cops got a burn grant for their radios, and BYRNE, not burn like in fire. There's been some various specialty grants come through. Generally speaking, back when times were better, we transferred money each year from the general fund into the capital improvement fund for projects that fit that description. There's some fairly specific rules about transferring from one fund to another, and that's one of the places you can get it from. So since the general fund is a little short right now, matter of fact, we closed some money out of the capital improvement reserve fund back into the general fund a few years ago, because you can only return the money to the fund from whence it came, if you're not going to do projects.
And under the stormwater fund, the CIP has identified $5.4 million of projects. Those are all stormwater related, and none of them are the 40 requests for backyard improvement.
No, these are a lot. The only part of that would be a set-aside we suggested over the years for small projects. I think it's like $25,000 a year for the small projects, either through a grant or a cost share, but we've never really pursued it because we haven't had a matching.
But that's the 40 projects for backyards, right? That's the
right, those
CDBG type.
Well, yeah, that's our CDBG or less. The money we're talking here about of that 5.4 is carrying like $25,000 a year for the small projects. Plus, these are some large projects, such as the both our study and the county study identified the channel that parallels Center Street as a major project, and we have several other projects around town.
Okay. That's Jamestown, right?
That sort of thing, yes, sir.
I just noticed under the water fund, there's basically a 47% increase from 2012 to 2013. So am I to assume that most of that money is transfers
No.
to other projects that...
Actually, that's the, I think the big hit on that is the 1.78 that shows up for spillway.
And we talked
So
about that last
basically,
week.
so it's showing up on the expenditure side. It's not showing up, let's see, is it showing up? There's a grant revenue coming in.
half of what, or...
No, that would be basically, it's basically, that's the
That's
county share, that's a pass-through. Our share doesn't show up yet because it's debt financed, so it doesn't hit our books until we go to permanent financing.
Okay.
So that's a 1.7 in, 1.7 out.
Next page under the water, oh, okay, so that answers that question. Let's see. Oh, implement recommendations, this is water administration, water conservation policy.
Right.
I remember seeing that, during droughts, but is there something beyond the droughts that?
There's things we've been working on that, one of them is the metering. As funding allows us to go into a meter replacement program, we are funding that heavier this year, trying to replace 200 to 250 meters a year. I think theoretically following a 10-year change-out program, which is the generally recommended, we'd be doing about 600 a year, but right now we're phasing it in as funding is available. At some point, one of the things, not this year, but start looking at a different rate structure.
Is that to manage the economic recovery?
That would be part of it, yeah.
It says as well as different rate structures.
Right.
What
You're
does that
looking
mean?
at like progressive rate structures where the more you use, the more you pay per unit, that sort of thing.
Okay. I just noticed under water treatment, measuring the success of efficiency and effectiveness of tracking all employees' time. Is that something that's specific to that department, or?
No, we track for everybody.
No, so that's just, where, under water distribution, continue adding to the automatic flushing programs for problematic areas? Where are those? I know there's
6 in service now. I can't tell you exactly off the top of my head. I could later, but typically at the end of dead-end lines where we do have to flush on a more regular basis, we just installed one. There's one up in Copper Springs area. It's lines that don't get a lot of service. You either send folks out there and flush and track your chlorine residuals, or else you can install these devices and you calibrate them to keep the chlorine residuals to the safe level.
So we have those, and those are in the...
We have 6 in place now, and we'll be looking into expanding those to other dead-end lines as we go. They eliminate a lot of manpower. Once you get it calibrated, we just go by and take a assurance sample to check for residuals, chlorine residuals.
Under water capital projects, fund forecasts only show one line replacement project every other year. How big is a line? I mean, please tell me it's 10 miles or something. I mean,
Hang on here.
I think Dave, in like 1 year you program in engineering, and the next year you make it's like 10% of the next larger
Right.
number. I think that's what that was.
I'm fumbling through here. Yeah, typically, water capital projects.
I don't think there was any line replacement showing up
Right.
in this budget.
Not for several years.
Right.
Typically, though, when you do get in the out years, we'll program in like engineering 1 year and then construction. You will see on some of the fund plans, you'll have like 65,000 1 year and 650,000 the next year. It's typically, I don't know offhand.
3/4 of a mile.
3/4 of a mile.
Half to 3/4.
and so on a percentage basis, that's, what, 10% a year or every other year? Or, I mean, on a percentage basis of all the lines that are there?
There's what, 100 miles of line in the city?
About 100 miles, yes.
Actually,
100-year replacement.
yeah. That'd be correct.
And there isn't anything scheduled for 2013.
Okay. Getting to wastewater collection, infiltration, and that's program 4430.
Mhm.
infiltration and inflow is the largest problem.
Mhm.
Tree roots and grease, how much does that cost us in, I guess, treatment of unnecessary,
Well,
and I guess the second question is, what would it cost to fix that problem
well, infiltration and inflow, of course, that's leaky lines.
from rainwater or?
Right. And then what we're doing is we do, on by the staff level, what we'll do is we'll look for low manhole lids, raise them, seal them. You'll be seeing at the next meeting a contract for manhole rehab, about 17 brick manholes, which will be
Right.
rehab. When you get into tree roots, tree roots, generally tree roots grow into the old clay tile line. The only way to deal with it is generally you have to root them out with a cutter. There are products we have called Root-X where we put a chemical in there to keep it back. The ultimate solution would be to either line the clay tile, put a liner in it, which we do not have funds for.
But I mean, is the cost of this incursion of water, I mean, what percent what would it cost to fix it, I guess? Or is it something that's so large that, I think you said you had 2,000 manhole
Right.
covers, and the majority of the leaks are at the manholes, I assume?
Right, the manhole covers are easy. I mean, we raise them, surprise people with a manhole that materializes in their
Right.
yard.
Very tight.
The manhole lining is $1,000 a manhole, give or take. The lining of a line, we were just talking about that today. What's the cost of the line?
$1.50 to $3 a foot, depending on the line and what condition it's in, and whether it's up or down. If it's relatively smooth throughout, then it's somewhere near the vicinity of $1.50. If it has some offsets and repairs have to be made, it's $3. And those are just estimates. I mean, it depends on the time of year and how hungry the contractors are and a number of other things.
But, can I just, so you had said, Jim, that you guys thought that you could replace 24 to 30 manholes, or rehab, 24 to 30 manholes for about $50,000. Okay. So, a little more than $1,000 a manhole.
If they have to be replaced, then obviously that's more, and we have to replace some of those each year.
I mean, it's not that big of a incursion into the system that it costs an equal amount to cleanse to treat the water.
Right.
I mean, in other words, this would never pay for itself if
What it does is it increases the amount of water you're having to treat.
right.
It can cause, where you really get into trouble is when you overload your lift stations. Just for metrics, there's about 490,000 feet of sewer line in the city, and about 85,000 of it is vitrified clay pipe, which is the 5-foot segments, bell and spigot type thing. Those are some of your biggest problems.
But I guess maybe the better question is, like we looked at the energy efficiency, what would be the payback number of years if you had essentially $2 million to fix all this, and that about what it's going to cost?
Yeah.
2,000.
I don't have an answer on that. I
I
guess I could speak more.
Right. It's not 2 years. It's more like 10, 15.
It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. It's not immediate payback. What it does do, you can either try and line your line, or you can stretch your lift stations, put in large tanks like we have on the North Lift Station. I guess I'm not giving you an answer because I don't have a dollar number.
I realize that, but I guess it doesn't really pay. I mean, it's just an ongoing thing, like,
It's something you need
it's
to
not
do.
something that is a priority from the standpoint.
Well, there
We'll never
can,
get the money back.
well, there can be some complicating factors, though. If you have too many overflows into the system, you could run the risk of spilling sewage into the environment, and that creates other kinds of issues. There's health issues that come with that. There are EPA sanctions that come with that. So it depends on the nature of the circumstance, the condition of the system, how many wet weather days you have in a calendar year, The county went through and did an infiltration and inflow rehab of the entire system, and it was multiple millions of dollars. Part of the problem is we had home builders back in days gone by that would connect sump pumps and floor drains right into the sanitary sewer system. So they had to smoke test the entire system to find those, disconnect them, put backflow preventers in, et cetera, et cetera. It can become very, very costly. On the other side of that, though, the county was looking at sanctions from EPA because when we had heavy rains, we had sewage that had no place to go. And there was so much rainwater in the sanitary system that we were facing EPA sanctions and all kinds of other problems downstream in Brush Creek. You remember all the stories about Brush Creek, they called Flush Creek. It's an issue, and if it gets to that level, then you have to take a different approach. So it's just a matter of, is it manageable at this point in time through regular maintenance and repair?
All right, that's everything. I think about 20 minutes. Anybody else? I assume, since there weren't any emails, that no one else had questions.
I actually did have emails, so.
Oh, refresh my memory with that.
I actually did email some questions, so, which is how I know about the mandates. So.
And then the last meeting, Chris, I believe, emailed some questions out as well, so they all have the same week you do.
Okay, well, hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions.
Well, I learned that Mr. Greenwood had better answers for you had you emailed him. The last one is a great example.
I think you did a fantastic job.
Oh, that's not it at all.
Staff, will you, Randy?
Touche.
You did a fantastic job, and it was good that the answers you gave last week matched the answers you gave this week. So.
Consistency is always a...
There you go.
Always a positive.
All right. Moving on.
Moving on. Okay, first up, attached to all of your stuff for tonight is, we'll start with special revenue funds. A reminder, in a general sense, definition of a special revenue fund is a fund that accounts for specific revenues that are legally restricted in some fashion as to what you can do with the money that's in that fund. So, oftentimes citizens don't understand that if there's money in this fund, why do we have to not do a project, or why would you raise my taxes when there's money here? Well, it's because there's reasons that you can't spend money in special revenue funds on just anything. So, in general. So with that, the first one is that we'll go over tonight is the Economic Development Fund. This is the fund that specifically supports business recruitment, retention, and expansion, tourism efforts, Gardner Area Chamber of Commerce. It has to be used for those, not necessarily for the Chamber of Commerce, but it does have to be used for business recruitment, retention, expansion, et cetera. And the revenue source is the transient guest tax, currently at 6% on any hotel, motel in the city. Of course, we all know we only have one. Specifically, well, actually, I go generally first. A decline in revenues over the last few years, pretty much from 2009 to 2011, has made it a little bit of a challenge to support both the Economic Development Corporation and the Chamber of Commerce in this fund. Prior to 2010, the Chamber of Commerce payment was in the general fund. In 2011 and 12, we moved it into the Economic Development Reserve Fund, which is the fund we're talking about now. And now the Economic Development Council has recommended moving the Chamber of Commerce payment back. Did I get it right? Is it Chamber of Commerce or EDC? Hold on. EDC, sorry. Back to the general fund and leaving the Chamber of Commerce because of business recruitment and retention in this one. And it's just simply, it can't support both because we're running a shortfall.
Question. We can make transfers into the Economic Development Fund from the general fund, is that?
I would rather just pay it specifically from the general fund. I don't want to transfer.
But yeah, those are.
I can cover it from the general fund.
Could go back and forth. You could put money into the economic development fund and then transfer it back to the general fund, whence it came.
No, not on the
Not-
special
not on-
revenue fund.
Not on special.
I would rather not. I think that because it's a special revenue, if you start mixing in general fund, now you don't have a special revenue fund. I would rather-
I understand what you're saying.
Right.
And I agree with you, but.
I can
just-
cover things that we could have, so, okay, let me maybe try it this way. You can do anything you want with general fund. So if you wanted to pay tourism, promotion, things, if you wanted to pay for the festival from the general fund, you could. But you,
There was special fund for it.
but, right, well, you could do anything with the general fund. But you have money in here that you can't pay general fund expenditures for.
Right.
So you can't pay for the police department from the Economic Development Reserve Fund. You can't pay for finance from the Economic Development Reserve Fund. You can cover some shortfalls from the general fund, but you can't use this money to plug holes in other places. So you need to spend this money first on things that you have to use this for, and then if you have shortfalls, you can cover it from somewhere else, like the general fund. So when you say transfer, I'm being specific, because I don't want to confuse that we would move money into this fund, because then you're starting to dilute the special revenue nature. I would rather just say, you know what, we don't have enough money in this fund, let's pay the EDC from the general fund.
Okay.
And that's just a clarification.
Where's the money accounted for from the hotel bed tax?
It's in this fund, that's the revenue. The revenue where it says transient guest tax up at the top, where it says 29,005 in 2012, 29,000 in 2013, that's the money.
Ah, okay.
How many how many rooms are in the motel out there? I was just curious. Does anyone know that? Because that's the only place that we get revenue into this fund.
Yes.
It makes you wonder, 2 years down the line, you'd have to think that the development's going to bring other rooms, and we should see a big bump in this.
You would hope.
gas tax.
But right now, you've got a whole bunch of hotels up the street here at Olathe competing, and they're building a brand-new Hilton Garden at 119th, and, I mean, there's been some discussion from the chamber about even going out and talking to them about maybe sprucing this one up, probably wouldn't hurt anything. But I don't know if you'll see a new one. There was a time when we talked about a new one south side of town, and that's, who knows?
It'd be great.
It would be great. So, and you want me to go on? So very, very briefly, like I said, the Economic Development Council recommendation is to move the EDC back to the general fund, continue to pay the chamber from this fund, and then there's a little bit of funding for the festival on the trails, and that's pretty, we talked about museum, the utility, we would give them a grant to cover their utilities. It's about $2,500 a year. And there's a little bit of money in here to replace some downtown banners. There's a little bit of money in here for a community theater, should they come forward and ask for it. There's actually, I guess, 2 now. We were discussing that there's 2. And so that's about all that's in here, because those are the things identified by the council as promoting tourism and/or the festival, that kind of stuff.
How long has the 6% guest tax been in place? Does anyone know?
Well, whenever we passed ordinance 2050, no, it was started out at 4%. And we raised it, it's been a couple of years ago, maybe 3, 4. It was ordinance 2050, whatever the date on that is. I don't have that with me. We've had 1 increase. Moving on. Okay. Second special revenue fund we'll talk about tonight is the Special Alcohol and Drug Fund. Let me give you an overview. We actually talked about this under the general fund as well. Kansas law provides for the levy of 10% of gross receipts tax on the sale of any drink containing alcohol sold by a club, caterer, or drinking establishment. And by Kansas law, in a city our size, it varies on the size of your city, but a city our size, we must divide it 1/3 to the general fund, 1/3 to the Special Parks and Recreation Fund, and 1/3 to the Special Alcohol and Drug Fund. So right now we're talking about Special Alcohol and Drug. And it's Special Alcohol and Drug Fund is programmed by, the county administers this programming in this, and the lion's share of this funding goes to USD 231 for materials used in educating students about illegal drug use and things like that. And each year, the county takes requests from various agencies for how much money they think they need, and the county decides how much each one should get. We kick in our share, and the county says, cut them a check, cut them a check, cut them a check. Mostly this goes to the school for us.
And we actually see that and approve it, right? Didn't we see a list of that?
You might have seen generally what happens is, looking back, it appears that you guys have seen a list. And you'll see it again, you'll sign off on that. And then as the people request their funds, we give them out, and it matches the list.
Do we have any control over what programs they approve?
No.
I mean,
Well, I guess you
So we
need to
used-
talk to somebody at the county, but no, the county does all the administrating of who gets what.
right, but I mean, the DARE program, I know we did here, and then Chief said it was, you know, canceled by the school district.
Right, I don't think we
We
have
don't
any
have any say in
say.
that?
I mean, other than
If you don't want
talking to the
Right,
school board and
right.
district.
For what it's worth, there's a little upswing in this fund, so that would mean we're selling a little more alcohol, but 6 months does not a trend make, so I didn't make any huge changes. Just there is a little upswing in this.
Or on that page, under expenditures, it's consistently at $34,000. Do we have any control over that, because it's always more than the revenue?
Well, actually,
Can we bring something down in that to bring it back into?
in the out years, I did just that.
Okay.
I didn't do it in 2013 because that commitment has already been made
Okay.
earlier this spring, and I don't think you want to surprise the people at this point. But I actually, in the out years, starting next year, I did match it to the expected revenues to come in. Well, I take that back. I kept it at 34,000 until they came together. There's a little inflationary part in the revenues. You expect more clubs and businesses. I mean, it's all just estimates out in the out years, but as I matched them up so that there wouldn't be a shortfall later. But I kept it at 34,000 in 2013 and in 2014 at this time.
Okay.
Like I said, there's a little upswing, but it wasn't enough to
Change
make any big change. And that's in the out years. You'll see it again next year, and if it's a bigger upswing, I'll let you know. Hopefully there won't be a shortfall.
But we do have the ability to control some of those expenditures.
I wouldn't recommend moving them down,
Okay.
because they're expecting a certain level. I mean, we've pretty much been right around this for a while. I don't think you'd want to start cutting back unless some of your places folded up, and then you'd have to let the county know we don't have as much money as we used to, and let them deal with it. But I think you can just hold it level until we get more money coming in. You can't use this money for anything else, remember?
Right.
It's special revenue, legally restricted, you have to do, and you have to put a third of it in this fund. So, the only thing you'd be doing would be building fund balance and not using the money for that which is being collected. So there really isn't any reason to build fund balance in this fund. You would want to keep it sustainable, but there's no reason to increase it. So, moving on, Administrative Benefit Fee Fund. This is, in a nutshell, the city collects 5% administrative fee whenever we create new benefit districts. It's typically taken, it's 5% of the construction or the improvement cost, so without all the financing and whatever. So, for example, the school, we talked about $4.8 million in infrastructure for the school. Rule of thumb is 5% of that. It won't show up till 2014 when we sell the permanent debt, because it'll be financed in with their everything else, so they can spread it over time. It's about $120,000 in 2014, nothing this year. It's the only benefit district we have that's new. So, and this is specifically for a transfer back to the general fund, because it is the general fund services, mostly finance, that takes, and in the previous pre-planning part of the benefit district, engineering, public works, community development, all of us are involved in getting one off the ground, and then administering while it's being built, and then the follow-up part, administration of the debt, the special assessments, the process we walk you all through, that's all handled by the general fund. So that's why we make a transfer from this revenue back to the general fund every year. And we do that for all benefit districts. Now, in keeping with, while you're going through your head going, 5% of $4.8 million is not $120,000, you agreed to do 50% funding, so the school is expecting you to make that fee 50% less than it would have been originally, and staff has kind of already said, yeah, whatever, because that was your agreement all along.
Wait a second. 50% of,
You agreed to share in the cost of the benefit district.
well, I didn't, but yes. you-
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
The council agreed.
But we didn't agree to cut the fee.
Well,
Are you saying that we're cutting the fee to 2.5%?
yes,
In
Because-
In addition to picking up half the cost?
because you have to be able to prove, because this is not just, there's statutes on this. You can't just say, well, we want it to be 15% or we want it to be 10%. It has to be what's known as reasonable administrative fee.
Yeah, but don't we have a 5%?
That's
Document
our rule
somewhere?
of thumb. It's our rule of thumb.
So there's no ordinance that says we
This-
get 5%.
But 5% when you're covering 100% of the, I mean, if it's 5%, but if it's half, if we're only supporting half, then it
Well-
shouldn't be the full 5%.
It should be the full 5%. She's saying that we cut them a half percent, half a rate,
120.
half rate
Right.
cut in addition to paying for half of the infrastructure.
That's what I said.
Right.
Well, that's not, I mean, are you agreeing that that's fair? I don't see how that's,
It's
That makes sense to me, yeah. I guess
well, no, it's 5% of half is, she's saying in addition to half of the infrastructure, we're charging 2.5% of the remaining half.
No. Wait a minute.
I mean,
But-
if you're saying on a net number that we're getting less than 2.5.
No, I
then we're getting-
calculated on the full number.
Oh, so it is 5%.
I'm sorry, it is, okay, let me start over. I must have Googled that somehow. Okay. Full amount of the benefit district would have been 5% of 4.8 million, which would have been $240-some thousand. And we gave them, we said half the fee, because half, the cities agreed to go in half. I didn't,
You didn't cut the 5% down to 2.5 on, in addition.
2.5 of $4.8 million.
Yeah.
On the half.
But it's 5% of that.
Right, 5% of the half, yes.
Otherwise.
Yeah, so in other words, the 5%, the rate remains the same.
I can.
It's the
not
principle
less
that,
than
okay,
Right.
and that's
Yes.
obvious.
Okay, just checking. Okay, I'm trying to explain this. Really, I'm not doing a very good job, sorry. So, it is specifically for the purpose of covering administrative costs. Hence the special revenue fund. Phew, sorry, I didn't mean to make that worse than it was. Okay. Moving on, Law Enforcement Trust Fund. This fund is specifically for the receipt of money taken from drug seizures or seizure of assets and sold or whatever all that process is they all go through. We get a cut of anything that's, and you never know when it's coming. So you can't spend it till you have budget authority to spend it. So when it came in really late in 2010, it was after the budget process and for 2011, so we had to budget it in 2012 and then you spend it, so.
Do we, I'm assuming that we seize our own, it's not always the county. So
It is done by other agencies, and the city gets a cut. And I don't know how that's done exactly, but it doesn't necessarily have to be seized by our officers, I don't think.
So if our officer sees it, do we keep 100% of it?
I have no idea. It's all done by statute. It's done by statute. So, I did go back and read the statute, and it's kind of confusing. It says something about if the county agency does that, and if the city agency, so there's a formula, it's all laid out by statute. So there's really no way to trend how much you're getting, because you might get nothing in some years, and this year we've already gotten $600. But it is, you have under your city code, how you are allowed to spend it. And it's to defray cost of complex investigations, provide additional technical equipment, to provide matching funds to obtain federal grants, and other law enforcement purposes as deemed appropriate by the governing body. But basically, when it comes in, we budget to spend it out, because again, you can't use this money for anything else. And usually the police department lets you know what they're doing with it. They buy a piece of equipment or something. No, really, you can't do anything else with it, so nothing else to say. I don't know what they're doing with this money. They do know they have it.
So does it have to zero out that
It doesn't
year?
have to, but
Okay, so they could carry it then?
they could.
Yeah.
It's just, but right now, it's budgeted to be spent this year, so if they carried it, we'd have to increase our budget authority. So it'd be better if they spend as it came in, because you never know when you're gonna get more.
Right. it's
It may
easy.
not be, right, you get something bigger. So I did send them a reminder, hey, by the way, you have money. They knew it, but I reminded them. Park Improvement Fund, not to be confused with Special Parks. Park Improvement is funded through the collection of park impact fees on building permits on a per-unit basis for residential and by the square foot for commercial and industrial buildings. And it's usually used, back in the better days, it was used for just that, park improvements. Jeff can speak more to that, but I think what he told me is 1 year we'd buy land and then next year we'd try to develop a neighborhood park. Is that right?
That's correct. For the most part, we utilize these funds for land purchase for neighborhood parks and then development of them. For the most part, that's what we use.
So right now, the next park in line is
Club Meadows,
out by the,
yes.
on the way out to the Celebration Park. But right now, we're using the money to cover the park sales tax shortfall. And since development's down, you don't really need a new neighborhood park right now, and you don't really need to be thinking, but we need to cover debt service first, so the money's being used for that right now. And just so you know, this is another fund that's affected by the nice increase in county sales tax. So we're running a little hot right now on the revenue projections in that, but you're running just a little bit slow on park impact fees, so it all balances out. And again, it's all going to debt service anyway. But things could get better quicker. We hope. That'd be great. Special Parks Funds, again, this is where 1/3 of that alcohol tax I was talking about, 1/3 went to general, 1/3 to the park fund we just talked about, special drug fund we just talked about, and then now this last third goes in this particular special parks fund. And again, it's going to park sales tax. In better days, we would have used this for engineering studies, planning for your park improvements. Right now, each of these three funds is getting about $30,000 a year. And then the park sales tax fund that I keep saying we're covering, this is the one. In 2005, citizens approved a 1/2 cent sales tax specifically to build Celebration Park and to pay for the improvements to the aquatic center. And the 2012 revenue estimate for taxes, right now we're right on. That's a reflection of our city sales tax. I've told you during the general fund discussion, we're right on. And 2013 city sales tax, that represents a 2% increase, which is the same increase I used for the general fund for city sales tax, not for county, city. And down below in the expenditures, in 2013, you'll see that negative $200,000. That's the part we talked about covering from the general fund, as you can see. In 2013, where I'm projecting the fund balance to be $48,000, so that's why we're covering part of it from the general fund. You know, if something changes, we won't. I don't expect it to change enough to tell you I won't need that money from the general fund, because I think I will. At least most of it. And with that, I don't have anything else to present to you on special revenue funds. And the other would be, oh, I'm sorry. I guess I just did them all. Special revenue and capital projects. Sorry. Oops. So the park improvement, in your binders, park improvement, special parks, and park sales tax go behind the tab that says capital projects. And then the others are special revenue. They're all special revenue, but the others are different kind. And that is it. I don't have anything else to say unless you have questions.
What are the other documents here, the general fund, is that what the changes you made?
Yeah, that was reflecting the county sales tax increase and the removal of that police car that was in the wrong column. So that causes your multi-year forecast, your general fund, and your general fund police admin. Those are, and then the water one was all about taking out that little excavator that Dave had, mini excavator. I just wanted you to have clean copies. I don't know that you really got revised ones before, but may as well have the same ones I'm working off of.
Okay.
So, but for electric,
Right.
you're done,
This is
the 16th.
16th. And I did talk to Randy, he's going to circle back with Bill regarding the request for impact on rates, and in general, what sort of funds we're looking at, dollars we're looking at, and what that could potentially mean to utility funds. And I did share that with him, that if there was to be a use, it would probably likely stay within the utility versus a, were you here when we had that discussion you were not here. Randy Tedford had said that after the fund balance, there was additional funds in the electric budget, and had asked to see if there's anything would we consider using that. And we just had a brief discussion. One of the questions that came up was find out what that would do if we were to apply that to a rate reduction, for a year, 2 years, whatever the number is. And then the other was to find out how much money that is, and if we were to accept that from the electric utility, that the greater consideration would be to keep it in the utility fund, either reduce the rate increase in wastewater, apply it to capital projects in water, wastewater, that sort of thing. So that will be part of the discussion on the 16th.
Okay.
With the electric folks here.
So a reminder of the process. You have between now and, I'm going to be submitting this to the paper on July 23rd to set our maximum. So what I've presented to you, unless I hear something differently, will be just what's being cobbled into all the forms I have to do in order to produce the notice of public hearing that's published in the paper, which sets the maximum expenditure in each fund. And you can always work backwards, but you can't change your mind and say, oh, but we want to spend more in some fund than we put in the newspaper, we got to start all over with the publishing process and the public hearing process, and the submission to the county will be late, as I've worked backwards from that date. So if you have any huge changes, the sooner the better.
Yeah.
Increases, decreases, we can always do.
Right, this is what we've presented.
But decreases within each fund, right?
Well, this is the max.
So let me just throw
Sure.
an example.
If you want to change something that decreases the maximum, let's talk about it as soon as you
So when
can.
you're saying maximum, you're saying overall.
I'm saying, as I presented, the
That
general
are-
fund is what we're doing, whatever, I mean, I'm moving forward unless I hear something different with what's been presented to you. If you want to decrease the maximum you're willing to budget, it would be good to talk soon.
But the point is, what we publish is the maximum expenditure allowed.
Right.
And if we have a revenue windfall, and you decide you want to invest in infrastructure or water lines or something.
Right, you can't.
You have to go through a republication process, which is quite arduous and frowned
It can be
upon.
done.
It can be done, it's just very
It's just-
difficult and costly.
Right.
To reduce expenditures or to not spend dollars that are allocated within the maximum in the budget doesn't really require anything.
Other than directive of staff.
However, if you have ideas now about any reductions that could potentially result in reallocation or something else, then sure, as soon as we know about those, we can start acting on them.
Well, I'm just gonna throw out, I mean, I think that we are making a mistake not investing in maintenance in streets, water, and wastewater. And I don't necessarily, want to increase where we are as far as our budget amount, but I do think that we should be looking at some opportunities to reallocate funds to those three. So,
From,
I mean, I can go through and give a lot of ideas, but I mean, you know, I'm looking, I think that there's a lot that can be done in each of those funds with, you know, I had asked for $50,000, $75,000, or $100,000. I just think that we are missing the boat if we don't start budgeting money and playing and doing maintenance out of those funds.
Agreed.
So,
And in most of those funds you're talking about, those are rate-controlled funds. Those are not necessarily general funds. So, you know, you don't have to necessarily adjust tax rates. You can adjust utility rates to achieve those expenditures if you wish.
Or you could cut spending.
You could.
another fund.
So what, I guess, what ideas do you have to cut spending?
We've
To pay-
presented
to
you the
pay.
budget that we believe is the necessary budget to maintain existing levels of service. If we had cuts, we'd have already recommended them.
so like, you're thinking take money out of the general fund and apply it to the utility fund?
I'm thinking that might be a possibility. I mean, I have some thoughts, I don't know if they're legal or not.
And, well, let's ask them so I can
Well,
find out.
I mean, like, so for instance, you know, I would be, as a option, we have about $150,000 in raises in the general fund. If we were to say, you know what, if our revenue, again, I don't know how this would work. If our revenue is higher, I have no problem giving that $150,000 in raises. But if we stay flat, I think we could reallocate $50,000 to each of those funds.
What is the total upkeep tally now? It was $32 million in deferred maintenance. What is the current number?
That's capital, right? Capital projects.
I mean, we went from I think Dave was talking about a $14 or $17 million shortfall, and then Chris did his public utility board, he came up with a $32 million. So is that a current number, or Chris, do you remember? 32 million was what you quoted, I think, and you did your public utility presentation.
I believe that's what the committee quoted. We had somebody else presenting. It was not me that said that.
Chris, that figure was just the water and wastewater, and it's current as of to when we looked at that earlier this spring.
Thank you, Jim.
It's just water and wastewater.
Street side, number, as far as...
microphone, David.
Oh, thanks. As far as just general maintenance of your streets, to keep up with a pavement management program, the number we've come up with several times, $1.25 million a year to do street maintenance. If you're running on in a perfect world and you had unlimited funds, that's what would be a very good place to be hitting right now.
To Chris's point, what impact would $50,000 have? Is it pieces where it needs to be a $150,000 or $200,000 project, or are we not able to fund it at that level, even if we look at cuts and reallocate some of those things?
If you're going to do a $50,000 project in streets, well, you know, one thing you could, you know, look, we haven't replaced any curb since '07 in residential areas. You could do a block or so of curb. You know, granted, is that going to solve the problem? Well, no, it's not, but at least it's a start. Because right now we're patching with asphalt because we aren't replacing it. If you wanted to take $50,000 and put it in wastewater collection, well, you could do, I think the number we had was, 24 to 30 manholes. You know, that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to do little bitty chunks. I mean, you wouldn't do, it's better than nothing, and it's certainly gonna get you started. It's going to at least, hold you over till things get better.
Well, and the other thing I think, and when I asked the question, I specifically asked without increasing FTE. So you would assume that you would bring the contractor or be able to spend this money within your existing. So that would be another, if we are looking at increasing this, then, eventually you get to a point where we need more people to do it.
Right.
So,
Yeah, this would be contract. These are all things we don't do because we're not equipped or staffed to do it. We do things like pavement, or crack filling, we do things like, sewer line cleaning, but we're a maintenance operation, not a construction game.
Right.
So how much are the raises, did you say? 3% is what you're...
it's $150,000 in the general water and wastewater support themselves, right?
Well,
It's in their
I didn't
own-
calculate
Right.
the other. It's less.
Why don't we do away with the raises and spend $150,000 on deferred maintenance? We still have almost $600,000 shortfall in the general fund. We have 8% water rate increases for the citizens and 11% sewer
Well,
increases.
one of the things that I want to be cautious, because I think when we say we have a $600,000 shortfall, that's a $600,000 shortfall, leaving a 32% fund balance, which we've all kind of discussed. 25%, and I understand 32% gets us close to that in the out years, but I just think we need to be cautious about how we're communicating that. That doesn't mean that, we're
not
overspending, you don't have
deficit
money there.
spending.
Right, exactly, so,
Well, we spent more than we taken in.
On that,
in that
on that
particular-
snapshot of time.
Right,
But it's
So-
not deficit.
So we also
Yeah, it's
spent
not a
less, we
deficit.
also
It's
spent
a
less. than we
shortfall,
took
but it's
in
not
earlier.
deficit.
right.
Well, we have money from the $6.5 million increase that we didn't spend. So really, we're still spending more than we're taking in.
No,
No?
we're taking that in. It's covering bond and interest.
It says surplus or shortfall, and in 2013,
For that snapshot in time.
which is 2013,
Right.
we...
But that also
Well,
means
here,
if
let's
we
put it this
have,
way.
if we've got a fund balance, that means at some point in history,
We have
we took in more
Right.
than we spent.
6.5 mils increase was what we took in, and now we have an excess.
Well, that's,
Well, just put it
that's
this
more
way.
years than the 6.5 mils. This has been going on for quite some time. That's why that fund balance is there.
Am I seeing things wrong here? The revenue totals are 9.3 million, and expenditures are 9.9 million. So we're spending almost $600,000 more than we're taking in revenue.
You are correct there.
Okay, so...
We're using
for-
the fund balance to make up the difference.
Right, we're using this savings account that we've banked
Right.
in previous years, and so we're still spending more than we're
Why you
taking
have
in.
a savings account.
Well, then, I guess
Yeah,
I propose...
Larry, I guess the question would be, what do you think is a good number to have as a percent of expense?
Well, I think if you ever want to make a dent in a $32 million deficit,
Then you have to
you're gonna
spend
have to, no, look at the numbers. You increased revenue in 2013 by 4%, but you've increased spending by 8%, so double. Call me crazy, but if you really wanted to put a dent in this, you'd say, we're absolutely not going to spend more than a 4% increase, the same 4% increase that we expect in revenues. That's the minimum, right?
So
really,
where
if you want to...
Where does that 4% come from?
Well, if we have to, then take 10% across the board and let staff find those cuts. I don't know where you're going to find them, because we don't have that information available to us. But, we could reduce travel, postage, mailings, $150,000 in raises that don't have to be paid. Those all make dents in $32 million. In fact, that's a much better dent than the $50,000 that Heath was proposing. And, you're just going to have to cut expenses. That's what I guess what I'm trying to tell you is, and this, how we got to this position in the first place was we always spent more than we took in.
Part of how we got to this position was the economy.
Well, again, you know, companies thrive and survive in bad times if they have the right vision.
And how many private sector companies go out of business where municipal companies cannot?